Hello and welcome inside episode 17 of the That Movie Is Ours Now podcast. My name is David Sugarman. If it's your first time on my page, thanks so much for stopping by. It's genuinely really nice to meet you. And if you're coming back, it's good to see you again. If you like what you hear, follow, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It helps other people hopefully find something that they might like in the movie world as well. And if you liked The Iron Claw, then I think you'll really like this conversation that I have with Stone Tussey. If you're on TikTok, you might know him better as Medical Movie Man, or we'll get an explanation for that name as well. He's growing fast on TikTok, over 6,000 followers, and that's not because he's pulling stunts or doing anything stupid. It's because he is really smart. He's got great opinions. He's nuanced. I think his opinions, even the ones I disagree with, are really well informed, which I think is the sign of somebody who really is thinking critically about movies, which I think most of us really love. And he's also really funny. He's got great reviews, sometimes very serious, and then oftentimes he'll do very silly videos. One of my favorites of his is going over like the top 10 or his favorite popcorn tins of 2023 that movie theaters might give out promotionally. So yeah, definitely check him out. Links to his TikTok, Letterboxd, Twitter, all in the description of this bio, as well as a link to my personal review of The Iron Claw that's on my page as well. And The Iron Claw, I think it blew a lot of people away. I had high expectations. Always go in nervous when I have high expectations, because what if I built it up too much in my head? What if it could never live up to the hype? The Iron Claw absolutely did. We talk about Zac Efron, his performance in this movie, and some of his career that led to the performance in the film that we got, the brilliance of writer-director Sean Durkin, and the themes of toxic masculinity, the religious allegories in the movie, and so much more. I had such a blast in this conversation with Stone, and I don't feel like wasting any more time. I just want to get right to it. The Iron Claw, recency bias be damned, it's one of my favorite movies of 2023. Hopefully it's one of yours, and even if not, even if you disliked it, one, let me know why in the comments, because no judgments, I genuinely want to know. And I still think you'll enjoy this conversation because it goes beyond just the plot points of the film. So, without further ado, this is episode 17 of the That Movie Is Ours Now podcast with Stone Tussey. And here he is, Stone Tussey, Medical Movie Man. We're talking Iron Claw today, hopping on the That Movie Is Ours Now podcast. Stone, thanks for coming by, man.
No problem, Dave. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive into all things Iron Claw, what's the story behind the name Medical Movie Man? Like, a lot of people have reasons for their names, and mine's really, I made a TikTok before I even started making content, and I was just like, I'll just make it my name and like the number I played with in high school for basketball. So it's very boring, but Medical Movie Man, I have no idea what that refers to.
Nice. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, some people don't. I've gone live a couple times on TikTok and people have asked me, like our close friends, like mutuals that we have together. I've been in the medical field for a little bit, worked in the medical field, and I applied to physician assistant school. And we just talked about it before we went live, but I actually got accepted to a school in Traverse City, Michigan for physician assistant school.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, my content on TikTok, which is where I usually post, the place I only post things really, will go down. That starts in August. But yeah, when I was starting out, I was trying to think of, something catchy that not a lot of people had. And I thought like the three M's in a row sounded good and no one else had it. But then that also applies to me personally with like my future career. I mean, I would like to also do movie things too. And I hope that once school starts, it's going to be rough, but I'm hoping I can at least catch a movie or two on the weekends, but we'll see with studying and everything. But yeah.
And I don't know exactly what a physician's assistant does, so this may be inaccurate, but I do have sort of a picture of you like practicing on someone who's in surgery. Maybe they're under anesthesia, and so you'll just be practicing some reviews and practically like, what did you think of the script writing by Sorkin and Fincher's work? What's your least favorite Fincher? Just trying that out. Here's a good one, and then we'll dive into the Iron Claw. As someone who like works in the field, what is something that like you watch, whether it be science fiction or real or whatever, that is like very misrepresented for doctors or the medical community or hospitals in film and TV?
that actually
Honestly, I
like
watch.
grinds your gears and open?
It doesn't grind my gears too much, I guess, because it's at my level of expertise that I have right now. I've only worked as a patient care technician, so I don't have as much knowledge as a nurse or a physician assistant that I'm about to have, or a
Okay.
physician. So a lot of I'm more. There are some things like with IV pulls, with the beds, with even code blues. I've been in a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of code blue situations where it'll, jump out at me. But I do watch Dr. Mike a lot on YouTube, and he does like reviews and stuff to like House and The Good Doctor and stuff like that. And a lot of
Mhm.
times, I mean, when shows are on for that long, they have to get most of the information right. So I think that usually TV shows do a pretty good job. I haven't watched too many movies, honestly, regarding medical stuff. But one thing that I say is an issue is the only place that people are just everywhere all the time, and I feel like that happens in hospital shows, is the ER. ER, there's people everywhere, but if you go to a normal floor, there's really not that many people, which is where I worked at. So that is the one issue. It's not always crazy, but in the ER it is, especially in a big city.
Fair enough. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Let's dive in. Iron Claw. Anyone watching this who hasn't seen it yet, yes, like spoilers to come, all that good stuff. It's been out for a little while now. If you haven't seen it, all good. Go ahead, go watch it, and then come back and give this a watch or a listen. So there's so much to digest with the Iron Claw, so many different avenues to talk about. So let's just start with this. Screen goes black. You walk out of the theater. Your initial thoughts, gut reaction were what?
I was really surprised that I didn't cry because I don't usually cry in films, to be honest. And honestly, it wasn't even the most emotional movie I've watched this year, which is surprising to me. We talked about it before we, started recording, but movie All of Us Strangers really affected me a little bit more. Still didn't cry, but I've seen a lot of people's, reactions to the film, and big burly guys just crawling out or crying out in the lobbies afterwards. But I think the reason why I didn't was because I guess it didn't give me any moment to breathe and to think, because just the story itself is just, relentlessly just hitting you one after the other with these tragic, things that happen to these brothers. So I think maybe that was the reason why, but I was shocked. And I don't know if you know this, but, and we didn't talk about it before we went live, but I went and watched it with Real Takes, actually, who you've had on the podcast.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
that was
Dan,
pretty cool to see it
awesome,
with him.
awesome guy. I love
Yeah.
that, and I love that you guys got together. And I think on the, you know, I agree in terms of, how much is being thrown at you, and especially if you don't know the Von Erich story. I don't know about you. I'm not a wrestling fan in the slightest, so all of this, other than the fact that they were wrestlers, blank slate, and the fact that their story was so tragic that in doing more research, this was still a sanded down version. That there was another brother, the name is escaping me in this moment, who also unfortunately took his life. And
Yeah.
so the fact that this story was so tragic, and I think that's one point I really wanted to talk about. Tragedy doesn't necessarily always mean good cinema. Like, think about like every hero's journey, every superhero movie. It becomes sort of like a cheap way to make you care. If we kill someone's, dad or uncle or mother or family, then we'll inherently care about them, which isn't always true. And I think, at least for me personally, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think it speaks to the first hour of the film and really making you invest in the world, and specifically the brothers' relationships, on actually making you care about them. So there's some payoff in feeling bad for them, not just because it's tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, they really make you connect more. Yeah, rather than the tragedies, more with their brotherly bond. And I think that even something that's very impressive, I think that, this story is more about them as brotherhood than it is about wrestling, is the
Mm.
fact that they made the very unique decision. And I was just listening to another podcast before I jumped on with you, to gather some thoughts, was the fact that that one scene at the very end where they all, Jerry Allen White, Carrie, I believe, he's on the boat and he meets the
Mhm.
other brothers, is the very unique decision not to, have that reunion in a wrestling ring, but have it on their
Mm.
farm where their family connecting. And there is another reason that makes sense as well, is because they, reintroduced the younger brother who passed away before all of them, and wrestling
Mm.
wasn't his life at all. And I feel like that really shows the fact that, this movie really is about brotherhood rather than sports in a sense, even though the whole family's life is surrounded by sports. So
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that at all. And I think that's really beautiful, especially because while the family's life was wrestling, and to an extent the brothers did enjoy wrestling, you see them without their father, without Fritz, outside the ring. And they do take an interest in each other's lives outside of wrestling. They're interested in the brother who, I think it's David, who plays music, and they're actually interested in that. They want to know about their dad playing music when mom sort of lets that slip. And so I think there's a lot of that. And I think in addition to that, I want to discuss that sort of, I guess, afterlife scene, because I think there was something to, I'm not a religious guy, but I think they got across this family's the importance they put on faith without it ever being preachy. And I think the idea of having that surreal afterlife moment really, I thought it just really worked within the framework of the film.
yeah, if you think about it, that's like such an important scene because it could have been cheesy too. And the thing is that the entire movie is based off a true story, right? But obviously, that's the one moment that's not based off a true story. Almost the most emotional, point of the story as well. But it's also the point where they have the most creative liberties. And even though this is a story about tragedy, you have to have the brotherhood aspect. So yeah, like I think everyone, whether they're big religiously or not, really wants just happiness and closure. And I feel like you said, I think the family did have like a huge maybe religious background, possibly. They never really hinted at it that much. But the fact that if you're an audience member and you have that viewpoint and you're not really into religion at all, which is completely okay, the fact that the emotional payoff was kind of worth it, and at least they have each other. And I think that might be the most important point of the whole story, is that afterlife scene. I think that it was handled very well.
Yeah, and I love on when Kerry is on the boat, sort of making his way to the dock to his brothers, and so much of the movie is sort of, hinged on moments that could change someone's life. And he's got the coin on the boat with him, and of course, had the coin ended up the other way, Kevin would have, would have replaced their other brother in the ring, and life turns out much differently. And it's sort of the butterfly effect always sort of fascinates me. I don't believe that, like, if I stepped on the wrong crack, dinosaurs would be like here, but there is something to like the ripple effect, and especially in certain cases, like, the coin, or even the idea that because of what was happening, in the world at the time, that he was pulled out of the Olympics, and so many different things, and these sort of, ripple effect that things, the way things went down, he gets pulled out of the Olympics, and then somehow that eventually leads to the tragedy of him taking his own life.
Yeah. And that was that was with the Cold War, correct? Which stopped the Olympics, I believe, because I think it was held in Russia. I believe that's what was the reason. Okay.
Yeah, I believe you're right on that. And I think, one thing in circling back on the tragedy that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, I think, especially someone who didn't know what was to come, I think there was a lot of like more quiet showing of than bombastically showing. And what I mean by that is, it would have been easy when Kerry goes out on the motorcycle to see him actually crash, and then they rush him to the hospital, and they have to amputate, or he loses his foot, whatever it might have been. Instead, cut to black, he goes to his morning routine the next day, and there's a reveal. And I even thought a similar moment was Maura Tierney, the mother. Instead of her having a massive crying scene and yelling and screaming about losing all of her boys, which I'm sure she might have done, it's her looking at the dress and the sort of idea that, oh my God, I'm about to wear the same dress to another one of my boys' funerals. Like, I assume most of that credit goes to like Sean Durkin, the writer director. Yeah. I think there was so much, especially because things were already so heavy, the fact that he was able to get across some of that in sort of like much quieter, dare I say, like smarter ways than some other movies do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I respect that too. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mean, there's a lot of so-called Oscar buzz around this movie, but I unfortunately am, looking at it realistically, and I don't think it's going to get any love, which is very sad. But I think that some movies, even this, award season, try to, create scenes like that. When this person's name read off, let's show the scene of them crying hysterically or yelling hysterically. So I think that the approach that Sean Durkin took was very much more realistic. And it shows you that he truly cared about this family rather than theatrics when it came to the story and the emotional toll of the story. Because, and I think that really, and I'm sure you might talk about it maybe a little bit later, but I think that's why Zac Efron is so good in this role. Zac Efron's a very interesting actor to me because I don't think he's, I think maybe Timothée Chalamet or Leonardo DiCaprio, obviously, I feel like they have a little bit more talent, in my opinion. But I feel like when Zac Efron is placed into the right role, then he's phenomenal. And I think this was the best placement for him. He's always had this type of talent, but you have to put him in the correct position to use it. And I don't think if there was, Zach really hysterically crying or screaming, violently, that it would have maybe worked. And I don't think he necessarily does that maybe really that much in the movie at all. But it's the subtle emotions that he's feeling throughout the entire film that really showcase the fact that he was the perfect choice for this film. And Sean Durkin, the fact that he didn't emphasize, he just made it much more realistic when he didn't, add theatrics, but rather, storytelling and the true story. So.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. So I want to talk about Efron more because I think he was so good, and probably including maybe some present company, certainly myself. I don't know about like prove some people wrong, but just like showed more depth and range than he had been allowed to in certain circles or in certain films. And I think, it's very interesting. I think we want like all actors to be able to do all things, and we kind of like we're very quick to like make fun of people who do the same thing over and over again. Like, there's something like boring about, like, at least personally, like what The Rock does. Like to me, like, go and do, and now he's gonna go do an A24 film. Maybe that'll be really interesting. And so we're very quick to like want to see people and do all like things. It's not different. I'm a big sports fan, it's it's about being set up in the right spot. As your star player isn't is good without a good coach around him, good players around him. And so again, like you said, he's got a skill set. He doesn't need to be all things to all people. He just needs to be put in a position to succeed, and then let him, emphasize his strengths. For so long, one of his strengths have been, at least in the mainstream, he's a good looking guy. Conventionally good looking. He's very charming. And of course, he has worked extremely hard on his body, and that's been a big part of his brand. Maybe to a detriment at some point. And I think he was put in a position to succeed here. And like you said, not a lot of yelling and screaming necessarily. Sure, maybe a couple scenes towards the end, but he really reveled in much more quieter, subtler moments, and being able to sort of play off, I think, a sort of macho, almost sort of meathead stereotype that might not be warranted. Like it's a funny scene. I think it was used a lot in the marketing. What do you want out of life? More ribs. But it does sort of play to the fact that his needs and wants at that point are very simple. I want to be with my brothers, and I don't want to, he wants wife and kids, but he wants a very simple life for himself. And I think, the scene that I've been playing a lot in my head that I think is one of his best in the movie, is the scene with Ric Flair, where Ric Flair comes into comes into the locker room after what seemingly is this really violent, emotional battle. Hey, I'll be at the Hilton, or whatever he says. You want to get a drink? And it's sort of, and Efron has this really sort of subtle smile that sort of, for me, I read it as this moment of realization that, oh, I love this thing, but it's also kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
I don't know how you read that moment.
Yeah, I kind of read the same thing. One thing that you touched on, a fact that about Efron is that, and I wanted to, come back to it, is the fact not only for his acting, but I feel like he's really charming. And I feel like that a question that I saw that was asked was the fact that Zac Efron was signed on to this movie in 2020. And since that time, possibly, Jeremy Allen White has become a bigger star than Efron because of The Bear, which a lot of people watch, and I know you're a big fan of.
Huge.
So yeah. So I saw, and that's in Chicago, right?
It is.
Yeah. And I love the Bear. I love it. And he's phenomenal in it. But I saw a very interesting question where someone asked, do you think that Jeremy Allen White could have played, I believe it's Kevin, and Zac Efron played Carrie? And I think one reason why that question was brought up is in real life, Carrie was in fact the much more built and bigger man. And that really fit how big Efron was in this movie, which is ridiculous. But for the story, I think that Efron's charming emotion is maybe something that possibly Jeremy Allen White might have not been able to bring. And I think that was really effective, especially with Lily James's character too. Now, I don't think Jeremy Allen White, maybe in his filmography, and I haven't watched everything he's been in, but maybe he can do that. But from what I've seen, I think that Efron was the better pick when it comes to being more of a family man, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think going off of that, I think there's a lot of discussion of like, they're like movie stars anymore, and I don't know that I even want to get into that. But like Efron probably still falls into the category of a star, and I think this is one of those films that uses that to its advantage. It uses what you think about him as a person, or the little we would know as someone, as a person at that level, but certainly as an actor, and using those stereotypes and using like your expectations to their advantage, and using what you've seen before. You know, I didn't see Baywatch, but like he's huge in Baywatch and he's huge here, but obviously again, using those expectations to, and of course, to draw you in. Some of it's like, hey, you got a star, you can put his name on the poster, and using that. And they still used a lot of those same tent poles of how you would market a Zac Efron movie, you know, that was for the masses, or for teenagers, or for, you know, for a Baywatch style audience, or to get people in the door. There was still a lot of exploiting and I'm not saying it was wrong, but wrong or right. Just, you can see there was a lot of, you know, exploiting sexuality and using how, you know, big these guys were. But I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. One of the things that first caught me, and I think this speaks to probably like makeup design. Yes, he's huge, but like when he's first getting out of bed, he's like beat up. There are bruises and his skin's like a little bit weirdly discolored. Like there was a functionality to him, a realisticness to how he looked for that world. It wasn't just like how Chris Evans might look in Captain America, where he just looks perfect. He looked huge, but it made sense beyond just being huge and for sex appeal and good looking.
Yeah, it's very much different. I mean, because Baywatch, I mean, it's two things. It's either, you know, being, I guess the word is shredded, or bulking up. It's two, both him in Baywatch and in this movie is completely very fit in two completely different ways. And the way that he handled his body for this, I feel like very much worked. And I don't necessarily even know, like he could have maybe had the Baywatch physique in this movie, you know, but I think he was signed on before anybody else. And maybe he understood how wrestlers looked. And that's very interesting that he would have to shape his body in a certain different physical way than he did when it comes to Baywatch. And I think something you touched on, which you're absolutely right, that I wanted to talk about, was the fact that people didn't necessarily go to Baywatch. They said, oh, I'll go watch a Zac Efron movie and Dwayne Johnson. Sure. But I think more people came to the Iron Claw because Zac Efron was doing something. And in the last couple of years, he's kind of changed his career just a little bit, but he's doing something different. Like they want to see, everyone's kind of wanted to see Zac Efron in this type of movie. Nobody cared about the type of movie that he was in when it came to Baywatch. That made sense, right? From what his filmography had been so far. But just the fact that this was so different, and the fact that you have him as a star, then like was very important, because this was completely different than anything he had done before, kind of. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, his career trajectory is obviously really interesting, and you could do a whole nother podcast just about that, from going, of course, anybody who becomes famous on a Disney type thing wants to then usually somehow get away from it. And so, you know, going from the High School Musicals, then eventually he did, you know, Hairspray, which is sort of the same category. He goes to R-rated comedies, Ted Bundy movie, and eventually now is, you know, is in a place like the Iron Claw. Let's talk about the ending, because everybody, of course, wants to talk about the ending and that final scene and what it all means. First of all, I mean, I didn't cry, but freaking gut punch, you know. But I think the thing that struck me the most, he is finally, you know, Kevin in this moment has sort of finally escaped the father, you know, the shadow of his father, and you know, he sold the company, and he's finally found a little bit of peace. And despite everything he's been through in this sort of what I'll call generational trauma, he still has like these sort of toxic bad things ingrained in him to the point where he won't cry in front of his sons. And the fact that it still takes like a child sort of just natural, like naive kindness to sort of like flip the switch, I thought was sort of beautiful, that like even through all he's been through, he can't shake certain things. It's too embedded in him and too ingrained in the fact that it comes from, you know, these people who have not, or they're not people yet. They haven't experienced life yet, but they are able to have like this sort of naive kindness that pushes him. And the fact that they go to play football right after. And I even thought like his son drops the ball or something and they just keep playing. The mom gets involved, which is such a far cry from the, you know, the big macho, everybody sort of competing for dad's love football game that we get earlier in the film.
Yeah, I mean, just you talking about it, one thing that I really like about the movie is the fact that his father, if I'm remembering correctly, doesn't really change. Just Kevin changes himself, you know? And I feel like that would have been, probably it's what happened on the true story, you know, in real life, but I feel like it would have been really easy and kind of cheap to create a narrative where the father realizes that he's wrong. But I like that he just never did. But like you said, something that's very different between the way that, you know, his father treated his sons and then how Kevin treats his sons is the fact that even at those young ages, which I don't know how young his kids were, but probably like 5 or 4, something like that.
Around there, yeah.
Yeah, is the fact that his father would have definitely instilled in them by that age to not speak the way that they spoke to Zach, to be that emotional, to say, hey, we can be your brother too. But because Kevin is a much different father, he doesn't, you know, he just lets his sons do whatever they want. They have that, you know, thought inside of their mind to say that to him, which I think not only makes him emotional because obviously of the brother line, but because like he's raising his sons the right way, which I feel like really means a lot to him. And his sons will not have the curse and they will not have the same fate, hopefully, as his brothers did. And I think that it's not only a reflection of the line, why he is, you know, being emotional like that, but it's because like he has a chance to do something that his father never did for him or his brothers. So yeah, the great scene. Yeah. I'm surprised I didn't cry at that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because so much of the movie revolves around strength and like what we perceive to be strength. Like obviously they were wrestlers and it was the 80s and it was Texas. Like there's a lot of reasons that like the what we typically think about of like strength, or at least surface level strength, are like pushed so hard in this movie. And in many ways, like real strength, particularly with like your loved ones, is having a certain level of vulnerability, which the brothers have with each other. Like the brothers are willing to talk, at least to some extent, about their fears and their dreams. You know, the brother really wants to play music, and then, but of course, it can't really break through with, you know, with their dad. And even, you know, Fritz at one of the brothers' funerals saying, you know, don't cry. And when they're at the funeral, unfortunately, I feel bad for this. I can't remember which brother's funeral it was. There's a shot where I think the focus is on Kevin, Zac Efron's character, and sort of blurred in the background is Lily James's Pam. And she, as you would imagine, she's bawling. This is horrible. She's in shambles. And he is blank expression, absolutely nothing. And so, you know, and again, the idea that he went through all of that and still in that moment, had his sons not said something, or his son just said, oh, okay, well then I guess it's not okay to cry because dad says it's not okay. And dad's not, you know, dad's brothers are gone. And that means, you know, then that would have continued, and that cycle would have continued, and pushing forward that idea that like, you know, surface level strength is muscles, but like real strength and strength with your loved ones is being vulnerable, which is like extremely hard to do. Like, not to get too personal, I'm awful at it. Like
Yeah.
I'm really bad at that. And so like, I think particularly that part like spoke to me a little bit as somebody who I'm talking about this now, but like if I had to go talk about something real right after this, like depending who it is, I would have a hard time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is tough. Yeah. I'm lucky that I was I guess brought up. I was really close to my mom. I think a little bit, maybe a little bit more than my father, and I have good relationships with them both. But yeah,
Mhm.
there's 50, like I think that whole thing that you have, and I watched your YouTube review about the film as well, but the whole idea of
Oh, thank you.
masculinity in this film, yeah, absolutely, is just it's really important, I think, for men to go watch this movie, and even young men as well, to realize that it's okay. You can be somebody like Zac Efron, you can look like Zac Efron, you can wrestle like Zac Efron's character Kevin, but you can still, at the end of the movie, it's still okay to be in touch with your emotions at times. You don't always have to put up, a facade for either your children or your wife. So, yeah, I think this is a very important film for masculinity, especially in 2023, where we have so many opinions on the internet about the idea
Mhm.
of it. So, very important film when it comes to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, and it goes to, you mentioned the idea of like you can look a certain way or have a certain, exterior and still be vulnerable. I think people are really complicated, and that's a good thing. Like we are smart enough as people to hold like two different thoughts, right? Like if somebody passed away who is suffering, you'd be very sad that they were gone, but you'd be happy maybe that they weren't suffering anymore. And so like the
Yeah.
idea of having like of holding two thoughts, like we're much more so like you can, if you want to wrestle, and that involves strength, and that involves showmanship, and that involves playing to certain stereotype for a crowd, for the audience, whatever it might be, which we see Kevin isn't very good at when he's recording the promos, and he's just horrible
Yeah.
at it. And then you can have all that. There's nothing wrong with any of that on the surface, and still be, vulnerable, not to the whole world, you the whole world, but to the people who matter, to the people in your life that you need to like let in your life to have like healthy, relationships. Because we see like what happens with the dad, who not only has these fractured relationships with his son, wife shuts him down, especially, that scene at the end of the film where she says, where he says, "Where's dinner?" She says, "I wasn't hungry." She's got no more boys to feed,
Yeah.
and it's sort of, and so the idea again, sort of lost my train of thought there, but it made me think a lot about what you were saying, that being able to hold on to two thoughts at once. Because again, I think we're the same way we talk about wanting to put like Zac Efron in a box in general. Like we want to put ourselves in like, we want to be one thing. We should be many things.
Yeah. I think it's important, like you said, that even though we're talking about, the idea of masculinity and especially how it's portrayed in this movie, but if you're a man and you want to go out and wrestle, that's okay. And if you want to go put on a show and be, this type of giant in the sports, area, if you want to do that, that's okay. But then just like how this type of wrestling is a performance, you got to make sure that that performance stops when you're no longer in the ring. And I think that's something that maybe is not talked about as much in this film, is that they're still performing for their father when they're outside the ring as well. So yeah, I think it's good that you mentioned the fact that even if you want to do this, it is completely fine. But just make sure that you're in touch with your emotions when you're not doing it, because that's what's important.
I love that you said that they're still sort of performing for their father, performing sort of for his, if not his love, his admiration, his, to make him proud. And I think that that's really good. And the idea of so many of us, present company included, get like really overcommitted to their work or their job, and they let that define them. And that's even harder when it's tied in with the family. And so the idea that they very rarely get the chance to turn it off. They leave the ring, and it's all about the next fight, or dissecting that fight, right? When he gets, thrown onto his back, Kevin, and can't get up immediately. It's sort of a criticism and a critique of that. And it never really turns off. And then eventually Kevin starts to get some things outside of his family. He gets a wife and he gets children. And so he gets to stretch a little bit away from that, I think, which is important, because there was no escaping until he brought people that weren't in his family into his world. He found a woman that he loved, and they made children. And so finally he had people that weren't directly related to him, because everybody directly related to him was all about wrestling, other than the mom, who could do a whole podcast on her, at least in the film, is a little bit detached.
Yeah, I'm glad you
And it's
mentioned
chosen to
Pam.
be.
So,
Go for it.
sorry, I'm glad you mentioned Pam, because me and you, I believe at the beginning of this conversation, you said something that's similar to me, is that we really don't have a connection with wrestling at all. And I think there is an important scene in this movie that might be overlooked a bit. And it's when Pam and Kevin are sitting down at that first date they have together. And he is basically explaining to her, this is why wrestling is so important. Right. And he's not only explaining it to her, but he's explaining it to the audience. Like me as an audience member, as I've WWE, I've never watched that. And I don't really get the point of watching it, because I mean, they show you in this film, yes, it is fake, but what is so important about it? Why do the Von Erichs care about it so much? It's because obviously for the father's approval, but what makes the sport is the performances and how you're conducting yourself in the ring. Is I didn't realize that's such a big part of it. And also the brutality, even though it is a performance, there's incredible brutality that is on your body. And I didn't get that. And I didn't get how do you get a belt for something that's pre-planned? It's based on your performance. So I think that scene was incredibly important, not only for, Kevin and Pam's relationship, but anybody who's watching this movie who is not in touch with wrestling at all. So I thought that was very much handled very well. And the thing that is cool about it is they don't try to do that the rest of the film. Like, they don't try to explain any more about wrestling. It's just that one scene. It's like, hey, this is why we love this stuff, coming from the actors, coming from the director, coming from the actual true story. This is why this sport means so much. So take it or leave it. This is where we're going to explain it to you. And then, not enjoy, but prepare yourself for the rest of the film, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because any movie that revolves around a craft has to make you care not just about the showmanship of that craft, but like somewhat care or begin to understand the world. Like different types of movies, but like Black Swan, you need to care about it more than just that they're dancers. One of my favorite movies is actually The Wrestler, the Mickey Rourke film, which I think does some similar things. Obviously, any sports film that's worth a damn has to make you care beyond just basketball or football is fun. No, they have to make you like actually care, or at least understand why the players, coaches, people involved care about this thing. And I think the Iron Claw absolutely does that. And I think I hadn't thought about that scene in that context, but you're absolutely right. One more point, and then I'm going to wrap up with a couple questions that I got to you from TikTok. I think on the sort of self-punishment side of it all, and there's a lot of that specifically for Kevin, I think the self-punishment and the brutality of it all, for me, a lot of it was encapsulated when he is training by himself, and you don't actually even see his face, but he is literally just continuing to bang and bang and bang his backside on the ring. And this is him practicing. And this idea of that he has just become sort of this, I don't know if glutton for punishment is the right term, but again, he's sort of punishing himself for not only wanting to be better, but not being good enough or strong enough to protect his family, to protect his brothers, who are, I don't know if at that point they had all passed, but, all around him. And I thought, that idea of strength and the idea of the brutality of the sport, again, it wasn't just about being, it's fake, but like those guys are still flying around. Maybe the punch is planned and maybe it's a little pulled, but like these guys are beating each other up. And I thought that was taken to a really good effect. A couple of questions for you that I want to dive in. From TikTok. First, Zach watches too much TV. He does a really nice job. What is your hottest take on Efron's filmography, his best and worst movie in his catalog?
On his filmography, my hot take is the fact, I don't know if it's a hot take, but we talked about it a little bit, the fact that he is taking acting a lot more seriously now. Like, he was in a stage after High School Musical, and for a while there where he was doing just, phone in comedies, not phone in, but I think he was really comfortable with comedies. And this is by no means, I don't know if there's a hilarious beat in the Iron Claw. I'm not sure. Maybe there is, like brotherly love kind of thing. But in the last, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, he's really taken himself seriously. There's a movie that came out on Apple TV Plus last year, I believe, or 2 years ago now, 2022, called The Greatest Beer Run Ever. And I
I
know
like that
when
one.
that film, yeah, and I know when that film was before it came out, I know it got mixed reviews, but people were seriously like, hey, like this story, Afron has this potential. Like he could really, this could maybe get him an Oscar. Who knows? People were considering that with the greatest bureau ever, not even the Iron Claw. And my hottest take is that he should have done this sooner because I feel like we talked about, he's choosing really good roles now, I think, for himself. And I feel like he could have been an even bigger actor if he did this sooner. But you said, or Zach asked, what's his best and worst film? I haven't watched a whole lot of his films. So I don't necessarily have, I would say his best one. I just watched it and I want to turn you on to it if you haven't watched it yet. And I might do a video about this because I just watched it before I got on here. But it's a short film called Save Ralph. Have you ever heard of Save Ralph?
No, it's a short film.
It's a short film. It's only 4 minutes long and it's on YouTube. You can look it up. So basically, what it is a short film that was conducted by the Humane Society of the United States. And let me look real quick and see who the cast is because he is part of the voice cast. It is a 4 minute stop motion film. And it has Taika Waititi. Let's see here. Taika Waititi, Ricky Gervais, Zac Efron, Olivia Munn, Pom Klementieff, who's from Guardians of the Galaxy as well. And basically, it is a stop motion film explaining the effects of animal testing in the cosmetics side of business. And it's comedic, but also heartbreaking at the same time. And like I said, it's stop motion. Taika Waititi plays the main character, but then Zac Efron butts in a little bit towards the end. Like I said, it's only 4 minutes long, but he is in it, and he really cared about the message that the film was trying to get across from the Humane Society. So that's a really important film. 2021. And it's funny too. It's only 4 minutes, but it has the exact same Letterboxd score of 4.1 as the Iron Claw right now. So who knows? It might be a little bit higher. So technically on Letterboxd, this might be Zac Efron's highest rated film, even though it's only 4 minutes long. But yeah, it's really it's eye-opening, and it's really, like I said, it's very humorous at times. Obviously with Taika Waititi, I feel like with his voice acting, that comes across a lot, but it's really heartbreaking. But yeah, it's on YouTube. You can check it out, only 4 minutes, but Save Ralph is a very important film that I feel like everyone should watch.
I absolutely will. I love that. Do you have I don't like to rip on people, but do you have a film that you really dislike of his?
I'm just gonna say The Lorax.
Okay,
like I said, I haven't
I never
watched
saw that one, so I can't.
Yeah, a lot of people like that movie. For me, I feel like Illumination, who made The Lorax, Dr. Seuss, kind of just phones in a lot with their movies, and they all do the same thing where it's like a bunch of pop music and I don't know, very like modern day stuff. It's very interesting. So I don't really connect with those films too much. So I would say out of all the ones I've watched, because I'm sure there's worse films than Lorax, it's not terrible. My wife even loves it too, but that just really doesn't connect with me at all. I can say that.
As I haven't seen the Lorax, so I can't comment on that. But as a absolute hater of the Minions, I went to a party once. It was a slideshow PowerPoint party, and we all had to like pitch something to make people convinced. I suggested a Minions Hunger Games because we got to get rid of them. And I think this came through the most for me. I worked at an AMC in college. It was a dine-in movie theater AMC. So when it was slow, I would just like sit in the back and watch movies. And that was the summer that one of the Minions movies came out, and had to hear them just like babble all day long. And it was popular, of course, like birthday party after birthday party. And like, I just, the sort of smattering of babbling, and like there's a lot of Spanish and French in there, and like for some reason, and yeah, so the Illumination department, I'm not a huge fan. The Despicable Me movie is, at least the first one I've seen, is fine, but then
Yeah,
they're only good in small doses. So on the Illumination front, I'm with you. One more question for you. This is another content creator who does some great work. Sarah's Popcorn Chat. Who are some of your underrated directors?
I've got two that I want to talk about, and one is more popular right now, but I think what he does is very underrated. And one is Paul King, who just directed Wonka, and he's directed Paddington and Paddington 2. I feel like he's not necessarily an underrated director, I would say, because the Paddington films are very popular and Wonka made lots of money, and I think he did a great job with that. I think what's underrated is the fact that he's doing something that no one else is doing right now. And I think he's making very good, solid family films that no one else is doing. Like that's what Pixar used to do, is they used to make family films. And I think, sometimes in their more recent filmography, maybe if I got to think about it, they've done more, Illumination. We just talked about it. Those are children's movies. They don't really think of it. The way they hook you, in Super Mario Brothers, if you're not a child, is by playing Aha, Take On Me, or something like that. That's how they hook the adults. But in Wonka, there's so much that you can connect with if you are a child or if you're an adult. And I think that is something that he does incredibly well. And in my review on Letterboxd, I said that what if Paul King was in charge of Disney? Imagine if Disney had someone with that much creativity behind them and originality. And Wonka is a product, right? It is an established character, but he did his own take on it, and it really worked, in my opinion. But then I also wanted to talk about one other director who doesn't get as much love that I think he should, and that's John Carney. Which John Carney, he makes very unique films, very similar to Paul King, as in he has 3 films that I've watched. I watched 2 in the past 4 days, where he incorporates original music throughout his entire filmography. He has a movie called Sing Street, Begin Again, and Flora and Son. Flora and Son is a movie that I just watched yesterday. And I think that Apple TV, we talked about the greatest beer run ever. I feel like Apple TV is a streaming service who's terrible at marketing and terrible at advertising themselves, but they really care about quality a lot. And that's why they have Ridley Scott. That's why they have Martin Scorsese. And John Carney, his new film, which is Flora and Son, that came out last year, was on Apple TV as an original. And that's the first time he's ever been on a streaming service. And I think that just shows that people in the industry know how good he is. And like I said, I don't think there's a certain director out there. Every film that he has is based on music, has original music throughout it. I would say Begin Again, which came out, I believe, in 2013, is his most, not Hollywood, is most commercialized because it has Mark Ruffalo and Keira Knightley and Adam Levine in it, and really big actors. But my favorite from him, and by far, I feel like a lot of people who know his work, is Sing Street. And what's really is unfortunate is the fact that I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It's an amazing film, and he's an Irish director. So I believe that this film and both Flora and Son are placed in Ireland, where Begin Again is placed in New York. But it's the fact that there's so many great original songs that came out the year that Sing Street came out, but I believe it also came out the same year as La La Land. And La La Land's original songs overshadowed a lot of the great songs that came from Sing Street. So I feel like that's really sad. But yeah, I feel like he's very underrated just because he's unique and he just loves music so much. And honestly, all the films that he's done, the music is fantastic. And he just uses music to tell stories about people, and normal stories about love, about motherhood, about brotherhood. And it's really interesting to see that, because I feel like he's very unique when it comes to that.
I love that. I love that. You definitely give me a lot to check out here. And so great answer and great questions from Sarah's Popcorn Chat. I don't want to take any more of your time. I promised you 45 minutes. We're at 45 minutes and like 30 something seconds. But before we go, where can people find you, whether it be on TikTok and any other places that you might be, Twitter, Letterboxd, YouTube, anywhere else I may be forgetting? And we'll throw all these links here in the description of the video if you're watching this on YouTube as well. But where can people find you if they want more medical movie man?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is TikTok. I don't post. I post every other day, I would say, and my username is Medical Movie Man on there. But then I'm trying to post a little bit more on Twitter, and my name there is Stone_Tussey. And then that's also the same username that I have for Letterboxd as well. And Letterboxd, for a while there, I like to do really humorous reviews as much as I can, just to make people laugh when certain subject matter. I think maybe you would like my so with the Iron Claw. Now that we're talking about it, my review for it, which was, how do you take a humorous approach to the Iron Claw? Well, when we talked about that scene where on the boat together, I said that in the back of my mind, the High School Musical 3 song, The Boys Are Back, played in my head when they all, when the reunion happened. Yeah. So that's like, obviously I'm not going to make fun of the story, but I thought that was really, cool to incorporate that. So yeah, I love having fun on Letterboxd. I try to post, longer reviews if I can on TikTok, but yeah, that's basically where you can find me, is Twitter, Letterboxd, and then TikTok at Medical Movie Man. But
Amazing. Stone, thanks for taking so much time out of your Sunday. I really appreciate it. This was a great chat. Definitely give this guy a follow. He does really great, real thoughtful reviews. Like I said, pretty much every other day, so a few times a week. He is a great follow, especially on TikTok. This has been another episode of the That Movie Is Ours Now podcast with Stone Tussey. Stone, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, David. Appreciate it, man.